acceptance of
in chaotic workflow. How do you
acceptance of acceptance of imperfections. I would say that probably headlines my way of working with video editing. And I think that stems back from how I learned video editing in the first place in the 90s and early 2000s. I had this part-time job after school where I worked on a local TV station, and that's where I learned the basics of this craft with master tapes and raw recordings. You're shuffling around in your raw recordings, you're picking out all these bits that you want to use on your, I guess that's what you call a master tape or something, I forgot. And I think this manual process just stayed with me ever since. If I look at any of my work from 5 years ago, 10 years, 15 years ago, there's this red line that is this acceptance of imperfections in a way. But I always sort of made, workspace where there are room for mistakes in a way. So today on a timeline, to make room for this, I usually just remove all of the snapping abilities in DaVinci Resolve, and I really just try to cut like it was a manual cutting table in a way. And when I find that there's a slight of small mistake, I leave it there basically. I never try to do this on purpose because I think that would be transparent. I think I'll be able to see when people do these things on purpose. So I think other people will see that as well. So I really try my best to be as good as I can in an environment where there will be mistakes, if that makes sense. And that is sort of a whole aesthetic that I actually like a lot. I think it looks honest and it looks human in a way. Especially in a world where we have so much AI and tools that just helps us make everything perfect. I think it's liberating to just accept all of the mistakes and even make that sort of an aesthetic. But I think that my YouTube videos started out sort of a sidetrack to how my videos normally look like when I work for clients. Because if you take my most recent videos, those looks more like the videos I was creating 5 years or 10 years ago than my start into YouTube. So I think that's my first advice, is to find things or way of doing stuff that maybe you have a path with. I don't know really what that could be, but it's the same with coloring. A lot of how I see and want to edit colors stems back to how I learned it, and that's in the dark room. So, for example, with Dehancer, they had this color head, and while you can do exactly the same thing with the color head in Dehancer that you can do with all the other ways of manipulating colors in DaVinci Resolve, this way with the color head resonate with me because that's how I learned it. And with that, there's also room for some imperfection and some randomness. I try not to look at the numbers, and when I've manipulated something and I want to go back to 0, instead of pressing Alt-Z or Control-Z or whatever, I usually try to just hit back at 0, and usually that would be my -2, 3. And that creates a whole mindset of just looking at what you're doing instead of looking at numbers. And I think that's like a healthy creative process. But I will try to break down stuff that I do that I think could be helpful, or maybe it's a creative path that makes sense for others to dig into and take bits and pieces from. So usually when I've had these a little bit longer term videos, like the one I did of Fuji X-E5, I had a month with the camera before I had to ship it back. And basically I just spent time with it. I just use it at my everyday carry, and I started to make these small stories, like YouTube stories, what do you call it? YouTube shorts, with different themes and such. So some would be centered around landscape photography or landscape video, or some would be about spending time with my family. Some of them would be about a city that we went to, or whatever the case. And then I had all of these sort of small scenarios or small stories. So when I went into editing the whole video, I already had these bits and pieces that were sort of chapters or mini chapters within the chapters that I could put in. And because they are already pieced together, although in a different format, but you can quickly decompose that. And although it seems really random, then there's a pattern to it, because you go into these sort of small mini chapters or small mini stories within the video. So that's the first thing I do. I make this bag of small stories that I can then lean into and either expand or do stuff with. And I found that that's really helpful, because opening an edit on a month-long sort of journey with the camera is really hard. If you've ever tried to do that, figuring out where to start and stop is really hard unless you are really kind of strong on the storyboarding. I tried to work with both a storyboard, scripts and all of that, and it just doesn't work for me. A lot of intuition gets dropped on the floor, and I get annoyed because I can't really follow that storyboard in the end anyway. So I think it's better for me to work in this sort of chaotic way of working. So I think it's important to take a step back when it comes to coloring, because I don't actually do a lot of coloring. I don't do a lot of color grading. I do when I work professionally, because then I work with log files. But I found that with this YouTube universe, it's better for me to make the decision about all this color and sort of visual style beforehand, before I start recording. I need to know if this is black and white, if this is something that looks like a nostalgic neck or classic chrome or whatever. I make these decisions beforehand, and so therefore I don't really work in F-Log or log files in general when I just work with YouTube. And the reason is really to simplify the coloring. Now the reason is this is the same as with the editing. It's how I learned it. I started learning photography with film before digital, and so that is just sort of the backbone in how I think about projects. I think about what the visual language is going to be before I press record. So I do spend a lot of time coloring. It's just done beforehand with picking the right profile, and that's where Fujifilm cameras are really nice. That said, I do still do some level of color grading afterwards, but it's just a lot more subtle, and it's more about adding the stuff that you can't do with your profiles. And that would be stuff like grain or maybe tiny bit of halation and stuff like that. And that's what I use Dehancer for. I've used Dehancer for about half a year. They reached out and asked if I wanted to do a review, and I was like, I've never done a review before, but I'm more interested in seeing if this works for me, if this is a real product that I would use. And if it is, I would like to integrate it into a video of how I edit stuff. And they accepted that, so working with the colors in a more analog and more uncontrolled way really speaks to me, because like I said, I like this imperfect environment. And but I found that I also like Dehancer for a lot of other things, like the whole managing of colors is really nice, because it mimics the sort of how I learned photography in the first place with the color head. When you work with printing color prints, you have these 3 levels, or whatever you call them. If you want more red, you have to take out cyan, and where you work with how the colors react to each other rather than just adding more of each of them. And that really speaks to my way of working with colors in the first place, like I said. So yeah, I think Dehancer has a really nice organic and analog way to work with digital files and make them more breathable in a way. And there's no limit to how you can work with Dehancer as the only coloring tool you need, but you could also work with it just being the final touch of your color edit that you otherwise done in DaVinci or Premiere or whatever. For that, I think it's really cool. Something that I get a lot of comments on as well is sound design, and a lot of those are positive, but I also find an audience that don't like my sound design, and that's just alright. First of all, it's really, really, really hard to balance an ambient sound design for a YouTube movie, because people are gonna watch your video in different settings and with different devices, and with bad headphones, good headphones, crazy sound layouts, and on a computer. It's all different. Some are gonna watch it without sound. So trying to balance this is stupidly hard. Sound design to me is sort of a hobby. I've never learned to do it anywhere, and I'm really bad at it, but But it's something that I really enjoy doing, and it's something that is gonna be part of my videos always. But I think that you would be surprised how little effects that I actually use. Some of my videos have a very strong sort of this whooshy things that you consider to be sound design, but in reality it's actually the ambient sound of my videos that I just leave in there always. And then I manipulate those a little bit to be more like, or maybe it's a more pitchy. Like I make some sort of character profiles for different things. Like my kids, when they're in the video, I don't really want them to be recognizable voice-wise, and I don't want you to hear exactly what they're saying. I've made this sort of profile for them that is always this pitchy, like elf thing. So when they're speaking, that's sort of their way of speaking, and my own voice is just like this when I'm not talking into the microphone. So I make these sort of recognizable characters in a way in the sound design. So I think when editing, I'm not only looking at the picture, I'm also looking at the soundscape. If there's like a ding or something humming, I might also, cut my video length to accompany that soundtrack as well, because I think that's nice. So sometimes in the first edit of things, I'm also listening rather than actually watching. Because a video of some random landscape, it doesn't really matter if I have, the first 10 seconds or the last 10 seconds, if they're sort of the same, but if there's a background noise that is nice there, that I can then, throw to the left or the right, or just make interesting, then I'll pick that instead. But in reality though, this is a huge puzzle to piece together, and sometimes I've made something that I'm really satisfied with, but it doesn't fit the length of the of my my voiceover, and that can be so fucking annoying because then sometimes I have to, because I work in this chaotic way, I sometimes have to really unstitch a lot of stuff and stitch it together, and it will never be as nice as it was the first go. But that's sort of the charm to having this intuitive way of working, I think. If you look at my videos in a sort of linear approach, you could say that I'm developing very much from the first one to the last one. But in reality, when I started YouTube videos, I was more like trying to understand what this is for me or how I could work in here. And when I got better and better at that and more confident, I've sort of worked this more chaotic, weird, more analog style into it that I already had when I was working for clients. So the later videos are more like the videos I was doing before YouTube, where the first YouTube videos were sort of me trying to understand what YouTube was in a way. And I was maybe not applying my whole persona into this yet. So I think about a year ago, I was trying to figure out if I should make the step into start creating YouTube videos as a pastime thing that could fit into my calendar. Twice a year I have these dead periods. It's January and it's June. Those two are dead periods where I basically have no work, and that's fine because the rest of the year I'm working really intensively. So economically it's fine to have these months off. But it's really difficult creatively to just have nothing. And I tried to do photo projects, but it's still a little bit unsatisfying to just make either a portrait series that doesn't really take off because I'm not able to work on it later. So YouTube became this thing that I could do some parts of the year. I then enjoyed it a lot more. So it's definitely something that I pressed in when I have time. But before starting this, there were two aspects that I needed to sort out. One was sort of why and what sort of how. I knew that I didn't want to do just product reviews or just opinions on cameras just for the sake of that. I needed to have more of who I am in this. So I needed a way to sort of also either make a journal or just presenting my life in a way. And I found two YouTubers that sort of did this in a way where I felt connected to them in a way. So one is Nicholas Hornbrook, who does these Albuquerque walk-around videos where he talk about either some gear or some personal things, and that was really a person that I could resonate with. And he was doing this in a way where I felt, well, I'm looking at his videos, even if I'm interested in the subject or not. I'm looking at it that I'm being, and I'm being not entertained, but I felt like it was sort of a conversation in a way. So I was like, if I'm enjoying his content, then I can sort of do this in a way. I know as long as I find his stuff interesting, then I know that there will be others finding the same thing that I like to talk about interesting, you know what I mean? So he was sort of the blueprint of a way that this could work for me. And another person was Ali from 1 month 2 cameras. What, 2 cameras? 1 month 2 cameras. Yeah, because I sort of identify with her in a way. We're probably around same age. We have kids same age, and she's interested in showing her life as well as talking about gear, and combining that in a way that I find interesting. So if I find her interesting, if I do sort of the same, people will find me interesting, you know what I mean? So those two were sort of the ingredients in what I could see myself doing on YouTube. And I think that if you watch my videos, that would make sense in a way, I hope. Maybe after half a year or something, I started getting more confident with the videos and applying more of my personal style into this. So I guess at around now, it's still like a 3 ingredients mix of this YouTube format, I think you could call it. Yeah. But outside the inspiration, another thing that I had to figure out is, how do I record? So one piece of kit that was essential for me to even start this YouTube journey in the first place was an action camera that I could have on my body without having to feel that I was rigged up or something. This last couple of years, there has been more and more of these small form factor action cameras, like the Insta 360 Go 3S or whatever it's called. That is really a piece of equipment that is good enough for me to not feel too compromised with the image quality. It's 4K and the stabilization is stupidly good. The low light capability is not very good, but that's okay. I mean, that's a fine compromise for me. But the most important thing is that I don't feel like I'm rigged up. Even like a normal size GoPro camera, that would feel to me in the beginning, that would feel too much. That would feel like I've had this piece of camera on my body and people would look at me weirdly or something. Today, that's not an issue. I think when you look at my videos, you would probably guess that a lot of it's shot with an action camera, and that's not actually true. While that is a key component, and a lot of these small stories that I was talking about earlier, they are both filmed with the camera that I'm using, sort of reviewing or making a story about, or it's made with the action camera. But when I come into this process of making B-roll, I guess you could call it, pictures of the camera, pictures of me using the camera, or pictures of just me with the camera, that is more staged, and usually that is filmed with a huge ass camera on the camera, so that's like 2 cameras. And I'm not running around in the street with this, but I might go out deliberately around the block where I live or something and film myself this way. But I'm not gonna go around and do street photography that way. But that is actually filmed with a full-size DSLR, full-size mirrorless camera rigged up on the other camera. I have the 13mm Viltrox lens. And when you put a close-up filter on that, it creates another aesthetic where you have everything centered, is sharp, and everything around that gets blurred out and distorted in a funny way. And that is something I just stole from this whole genre of YouTube creators that I don't really know how to describe. But you could call that the Gork style, I think. And I'm not afraid to say that that's sort of copied from that.
this video inspired to go dig into your own upbringing in photography or in your editing or your video work and find sort of